everyone, my name's Alice and today we've got a lovely story to read all together. This is called Awesome Arani. Arani loved planets. Ever since her parents could remember, Arani had been fascinated with the solar system. She had all the books about planets, she knew all the facts about planets, and she even only ate planet-shaped foods like apples, eggs and meatballs. Mum and Dad helped Arani make her own planet mobile out of paper mache, which she hung in her room above her bed. What Arani liked best about the solar system was how all the planets were so different, just like Arani. On difficult days, Arani would try to describe to Mum and Dad what she was thinking, but the words would get all jumbled up. Instead, Arani would tell them about which planet she felt like that day. Sometimes she would feel really energetic and spin around and around like Mercury zooming around the sun. Other times she felt cool and focused, like Neptune the ice giant, and would be so absorbed in reading her planet books for hours and hours she wouldn't hear Mum calling her for dinner. When Arani had to move schools, she had lots of churning feelings in her tummy, like the swirling storms of Jupiter. She liked her old school and her old friends. She didn't want to go to this strange new school with unfamiliar children. "Don't worry, Arani," said Mum as she dropped Arani off at the school gate. "Just be yourself." But Arani found it hard to be herself. She tried to make friends by talking about all the planets, but they weren't interested. Arani didn't understand because planets were the most interesting thing in the world, like how Venus spins in the opposite direction to Earth, and how Uranus was full of hydrogen sulfide, which makes the atmosphere smell like rotten eggs. "Rotten eggs?" said Natalie. "Gross!" "You smell like rotten eggs, Arani," said George, holding his nose. The other children laughed. Arani felt like Mars then, all hot and dusty and red. There were other things about her new school that Arani didn't like. She found it very hard to focus and couldn't keep track of which activity she was supposed to be doing. The bell would also ring very suddenly and very loudly, so Arani would have to clap her hands over her ears, which would make the other children laugh at her again. Arani felt like Pluto then, a cold little planet, smaller and different to the rest of the solar system. At lunchtime, Mr. Solaro sat down with Arani and asked her what was wrong. Arani said she felt a bit of Mars, a bit of Jupiter, and a bit of Pluto. Mr. Solaro didn't understand, so instead, Arani told him all that she knew about the planets in the solar system. She even told him about the planet mobile she had in her room. When she was done, Mr. Solaro smiled his nice warm smile and said, "Not to worry." The first lesson of the afternoon was science. Mr. Solaro stood up in front of the class and said, "I know we're studying food chains at the moment, but today I'd like to do a special lesson on the solar system. Does anyone here have any facts about planets they'd like to share with the class?" Arani's hand shot up like a rocket. She counted off all the planets and all their qualities. Mr. Solaro waited patiently until she had finished. "Amazing work, Arani," said Mr. Solaro. "You're a real expert. In fact, why don't you bring in that mobile of yours tomorrow morning? It'll be a great way for all of us to learn." Arani's chest swelled up and felt as bright as Venus shining in the sky. The next morning, Arani strode proudly into class with her mobile to show her classmates. But as she walked to her desk, George stuck his foot out. Arani tripped and her lovely mobile fell to the floor and smashed. "Whoops," sniggered George. "Sorry, awkward Arani." The other children laughed. Arani suddenly felt very hot and very angry, like the great red storm on Jupiter, growing bigger and bigger and bigger. Arani couldn't quite remember what happened next, but she found herself sitting in the school office, feeling exhausted. Mum arrived at the school and Mr. Solaro had a private conversation with her in the hallway. When they came back, Mum said that perhaps it might be best for Arani to spend a couple of days at home to rest. At first, it was nice being at home, but soon Arani got bored. She realised she had started getting used to the routine at school, and she found herself thinking about the neat blob of jam and the round portion of rice pudding they sometimes had for dessert. Her room wasn't the same without her planet mobile. "I'm ready to go back to school," Arani told her mum. When Arani got to school, she couldn't believe it. In the middle of the classroom ceiling hung a huge mobile with 8 planets. It was like her mobile at home, but even bigger and more colourful. "Welcome back, Arani," said Mr. Solaro. "What do you think? We've been making it all week." "This one is Mercury," said Ellen. "It's the smallest planet in the solar system and it's covered in craters." "This one is Venus," said Yassine. "It's the brightest and hottest planet in our solar system." "I like Earth best," said Olivia quietly. "It's called the Goldilocks planet because it's not too hot and it's not too cold and it's our home." "Until we start living on Mars," said Nathan excitedly, "where there's red dust everywhere and the sunsets are blue." Habiba shook her head. "Nope, Jupiter's the best. It's the biggest planet and has a storm the size of Earth that's been going for 350 years. "Oh, what about Saturn?" said Paolo. "It's so light that if you put it in a really big bathtub, it would float." Then Natalie and George stepped forwards. George pointed upwards. "I remember you told me that Uranus smells like rotten eggs. I thought it was gross at first, but that's actually pretty cool." "And I went to the library and read a book all about planets," said Natalie. "And I found out that on Neptune it rains diamonds." "Arani," said George tentatively, "I'm sorry I broke your mobile." Arani nodded. "It's okay, George." They both smiled. "Have you spotted what's missing?" said Natalie. Waiting for Arani on her desk, right in the centre of the room, was a big and beautiful sun. Mr. Solaro made that one. Mr. Solaro smiled his big warm smile. "Here you go, Arani. Tie it up. You know where it belongs." Arani reached up and tied on the sun right in the centre of the room. It fit perfectly in the middle of all the other planets. "All right now, class, let's get back to work," said Mr. Solaro. "Would you like to sit next to me today, Arani?" said Natalie. Arani nodded and sat down next to her. Mr. Solaro turned to the board and started to write out some maths equations. At that moment, Arani's chest felt like the sun. Huge, luminous, and awesome. Thank you so much for listening to our lovely story. And if you'd like to have a go at making one of our planet mobiles just like Arani, check out our craft tutorial. Thank you.